that have our investments and our assets denominated in U.S. dollars have to rethink the way we've operated in the past. Can you talk about that?
Sure. Well, I mean, eventually, unless the system can be brought into balance, and again, I contend it can't be. I mean, to do so requires slashing the social programs. Obama was right when he said the Republicans are trying to break the government social contract with the people. Well, I don't know what social contract exists there, but the basic financial numbers are such that the social programs that have been structured and that are the government programs that are still being planned, but what's in place has bankrupted the country. There's no way the government can raise the funds to cover that.
Can I ask you to clarify one thing, because I'm a little bit confused, just this one point. When you talked about how you can't raise enough taxes and you can't cut enough government spending to balance anything, then what do we do, John?
What we do is we print the money to pay off the obligations. Either that, or you do the politically impossible thing of slashing Social Security and eliminating Medicare, much as it's known today.
Wouldn't that ruin the confidence in the government and in the dollar and in everything?
Well, it's a devil's choice. I mean, again, the political will is not there to do the slashing. We saw that. There's good reason from a political standpoint that people want to avoid doing that, because there are a lot of people who are dependent upon that. And I think if someone talked honestly with the American people and said, "Look, we're bankrupt. We've got to change these systems, or everything's going down the drain," that maybe I think you'd find a lot of people that would rally around that and be willing to sacrifice. Americans have in the past. We've overspent, but.
When you say we've overspent,
I don't see that happening. I don't see it being feasible to bring it into balance. And since that's the alternative to printing the money, the way these characters work in Washington, we're going to see the money printed, and that dooms you eventually to a hyperinflation. It's just a matter of when. It reflects a great loss of confidence in the currency.
Wouldn't that be better politically to send us into hyperinflation so that the American people don't have to know that we're bankrupt and that there isn't going to be a Medicare or Social Security?
Well, I think that's a decision that's been made.
It's obvious.
All along, they keep pushing it, again, the proverbial can down the road, kicking it down the road there. There is a day of reckoning here. They've always put forth, or at least in the last several decades, put forth the position that the U.S. dollar doesn't matter, the deficit doesn't matter, but it does. There comes a day of reckoning. We're going through that now. And what's happened in the last 6 months is that we've seen the U.S. dollar lose its safe haven status. You look at the disruptions in the Mideast that normally would have created some flight to safety in the dollar. Flight to safety was into gold and the Swiss franc. In the wake of this deficit negotiation debacle, the dollar has plunged. The global confidence in the dollar has been largely killed, and it's very difficult to get it back. It's just a matter of all the dust settling in extremely disrupted and unstable markets. The dollar here is heading a lot lower. What happens is the dollar declines in value. Oil, which is denominated in U.S. dollars, tends to go up in price. That's the way it balances out in the marketplace. And the inflation that we've seen recently, the pickup there, has been due to higher oil inflation, but not because of strong demand for oil. It's because of the Fed's policies aimed at debasing the dollar, the quantitative easing.
What does the quantitative easing mean in relation to what you're saying? I don't get that part.
Well, the quantitative easing by the Fed is basically a policy of dollar debasement. Bernanke defined it back in 2002. He said we can always prevent a deflation. He doesn't want a 1930s style deflation, and he said that the Federal Reserve and the central government could always, in concert, debase the dollar and create inflation, both being the same thing. The way you do that is with a quantitative easing. he's pumped extraordinary amounts of cash into the system. Now, it hasn't translated through to the money supply. Normally it would if banks were lending money, but they haven't lent the money out. They've lent it back to the Fed. They got the banking systems largely insolvent. Yet the rest of the world sees this happening. They know that the long-term picture here is for a weaker dollar. The dollar is being sacrificed. They sell off the dollar. They begin to dump dollar assets. It intensifies. Now we're at a point now that you could have a massive decline in the U.S. dollar at any time. I'm not predicting it for any particular set point in time, but that risk is there. And along with that, you'd have heavy selling of foreign-held U.S. treasuries.
Who wins? Who are the winners? Or who would be shorting the U.S. currency and therefore making a profit from the currency getting weaker and weaker and weaker?
It's something that we're doing when we're debasing our own currency. So against the rest of the world, the dollar's declining. People have their assets in the rest of the world are doing better than people who have their world denominated in dollars.
So 401ks and other types of assets denominated in U.S. dollars are in a high risk condition.
Well, they're losing long-term value here as the dollar gets debased, because that usually will be matched with inflation. Seeing the same thing with gold. It's a leading indicator of where inflation is heading.
The problem with gold for many traditional investors is that they have a hard time looking at gold as a hedge against inflation because of the fluctuations of the gold and the metals prices. Respond to that, would you?
Well, I mean, it's volatile, and as is everything in the markets these days. But you go over the last 7 years and you look at the beginning of the year and the end of the year, gold has in each year outperformed the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Gold gets a bad name on Wall Street because the average broker doesn't make any commission on it, and it's the physical gold that people need to hold here as a hedge and hold it for the long term, not in terms of day-to-day volatility. I'm certainly not looking at estimating any kind of short-term movements in gold or currencies, but over the long term, the dollar is going to become worthless, and if you have bought gold and moved into some of the stronger currencies, such as the Swiss franc, the Australian dollar, Canadian dollar, you'll find that you've been able to preserve the purchasing power of the dollar. I mean, in a hyperinflation, I define a hyperinflation very simply as when the largest note in circulation before the inflation, in this case a $100 bill, becomes worth more as toilet paper than currency, than money, and you have a hyperinflation. And under that type of a circumstance, there's really no upside limit on gold other than the downside value of the dollar. The dollar goes to zero. I mean, I don't know where it goes. Let's say gold goes up to $100,000. And say, well, I'm going to take my profits at this level. You don't have any profits. What you've done is you've preserved the purchasing power of the dollars that you put into the gold. What you've lost is what you had invested in paper assets and dollars that are now virtually worthless. So that it's not so much that you have a gainer here, it's that you have a loser, and the loser is a guy that's holding his assets in dollars.
From your view now, what is the blind spot in the American conscious mind that is preventing us from seeing clearly that we're on the road to hyperinflation? What is preventing us from embracing this, in your view?
Generally, a lack of people talking about it. You're not going to get Wall Street talking about it much. Again, they always put forth a rosy picture to help sell their products. You did have some very healthy conversation that took place from some people in the government back during the debt ceiling debate. Not only focused world attention on the problem, but also for some domestic people. And a lot of people just couldn't care less until they find that they're suffering financially and wonder what happens. I mean, that's always the case. But I think you'll find there are a lot more people talking about it today than there were 2 years ago.
Now, in an example you gave about Zimbabwe as an